was a vast, untamed wilderness. It was a beautiful chaos of forgotten words, borrowed phrases, and shifting meanings. A library without a proper catalogue. Scholars knew that for all its majesty, the language of Shakespeare, Milton, and the new booming American Republic was undocumented. There was no single, complete map of its soul. In the mid-19th century, in the echoing halls of the Philological Society in London, a revolutionary idea was born. A definitive dictionary, one that wouldn't just list words, but would trace their life story, from their first whisper in print to their latest modern definition. It would be called the New English Dictionary on Historical Principles, later known globally as the Oxford English Dictionary, OED. It was an undertaking of such staggering hubristic scale that it was projected to take 10 years. It would ultimately take over 50. It would consume lives, bankrupt institutions, and test the very limits of human patience. And at its very heart, spanning thousands of miles and an unfathomable gulf of sanity, lay a secret partnership. A brilliant, self-made scholar trying to define every word in the known world, and a madman, a decorated, convicted American murderer who became his most valuable and astonishing collaborator. This is the true story of James Murray and Dr. William Chester Minor, and the secret that built the world's greatest dictionary. The Scottish Schoolmaster and the Blank Slates. Oxford, England, 1879. Dr. James Augustus Henry Murray was, in all senses, an unlikely hero for this colossal task. He was not a product of the Oxford establishment. He was a self-taught, working-class Scot who had left school at 14. What he lacked in institutional pedigree, he made up for in sheer, voracious, self-willed genius. He was a master of a dozen languages, a passionate philologist, and a man whose beard was legendary, a cascade of white and grey that flowed down to his chest, instantly giving him the air of a venerable prophet. When he accepted the position of editor for the dictionary, it was a thankless, nearly impossible job that several other distinguished academics had either rejected or abandoned in despair. The sheer volume of the material was intimidating. The project had already been gathering dust and definitions for 2 decades. The work was housed in an austere, prefabricated building Murray affectionately dubbed the Scriptorium. It was little more than a corrugated iron shed in his own garden in Oxford, but inside, the true scale of the work became visible. The previous editors had collected, or rather simply accumulated, millions of slips of paper. These weren't just slips of paper, they were the essential DNA of the dictionary. Each slip contained a single quotation illustrating the use of a single word at a specific point in history. The goal was to find the earliest recorded use of a word and then track its semantic evolution. The material was organized, or rather disorganized, in pigeonholes. Imagine walls of small wooden compartments, each one labeled with the letters of the alphabet and sometimes with the first 2 or 3 letters of a word. A, abandon. A, abate. A, ability. Thousands upon thousands of them, each one bursting with slips. Murray, with his small team of assistants, stared at this mountain of undigested English. The first word they were tasked with defining was A. The initial estimate of the dictionary's length had ballooned from 4 volumes to 10. The completion date had been pushed back indefinitely. Murray was essentially trying to map a continent with a collection of random, unsorted snapshots. He quickly realized that the few thousand volunteer readers the Philological Society had initially recruited were not enough. He needed an army.
On an unprecedented, revolutionary strategy, a massive global public appeal. He drafted a circular letter, a manifesto really, and had 5,000 copies printed. This circular was his call to the English-speaking world, an appeal for help in reading books, specifically to hunt for quotations that illustrated a word's usage. Wanted, an army of volunteer readers to aid in collecting quotations for the Philological Society's new English dictionary. He specifically outlined the types of material needed. Early usage, the earliest possible instance of every word. Obsolete words, the last recorded use of a word that had since dropped out of the language. Intermediate uses, quotations tracing the change in meaning across the centuries. Rare words, examples of words found only in 1 or 2 books. Americanisms. Crucially, he asked for contributions from the United States, recognizing that the young nation had already begun to forge its own powerful, distinct vocabulary. The response was overwhelming. The sheer scale of the project captured the imagination of the reading public. Slips began to pour into the Scriptorium from professors, parsons, lawyers, housewives, and ordinary anonymous citizens who simply loved the English tongue. They came from every corner of the British Empire and, significantly, from the United States. Among the deluge of contributions, one specific package, arriving from a high-security lunatic asylum in Crowthorne, Berkshire, England, would stand out. The handwriting was precise, almost calligraphic. The quotations were impeccably selected, erudite, and startlingly comprehensive. The sender was a patient named Dr. W.C. Minor. He quickly became one of the most prolific and valued contributors to the entire dictionary project. The architect of a word, Dr. W.C. Minor. Broadmoor, Criminal Lunatic Asylum, Berkshire, England, 1879. Across the sea from Murray's bustling, scholarly world lay the dark, high-walled institution of Broadmoor. It was here, confined in a comfortable, though heavily guarded apartments in the first-class section, that Dr. William Chester Minor lived. To the outside world, Dr. Minor was a man of genteel misfortune. To the authorities, he was a dangerous criminal lunatic, committed after murdering an innocent man, a brewer named George Moret, whom he mistakenly believed to be an agent of a sinister conspiracy haunting his waking hours. To understand Dr. Minor, one must first understand the Civil War, which had fractured his mind. Born in Ceylon, now Sri Lanka, in 1834 to American missionary parents, Minor had trained as a surgeon at Yale Medical School. When the Civil War broke out, he served as an assistant surgeon in the Union Army, a role that plunged him into a hell he would never fully escape. His duties involved the appalling task of branding deserters, and worse, participating in the grisly aftermath of battles like the Wilderness and the Siege of Petersburg, where the sheer volume of mangled and dying men overwhelmed him. It was during the Battle of the Wilderness in 1864 that the true trauma took root. A drunken, abusive Irish soldier was ordered to be branded with the letter D for desertion. Minor performed the operation, and the soldier, in his delirium, spat a terrible curse, an oath of eternal vengeance, which lodged in Minor's mind like a splinter of glass. This, combined with the horrors of the field hospital, precipitated the onset of his acute paranoia. He resigned from the army in 1868, sought cures in Europe, and eventually settled in London, living off his pension. But the delusions followed him. He became convinced that Irish Catholics were entering his room at night, stealing his books, tormenting him, and, most terrifyingly, subjecting him to a nightly regimen of sexual torture by means of an elaborate machine and mesmerism. His paranoia festered until, one night, in the fog of a London street, he shot George Moret, believing him to be the leader of his tormentors. He was found not guilty on the grounds of insanity and committed to Broadmoor for life.